The words slipped from her lips like they cost her nothing. "You're not really family." I remember blinking slowly, not sure I had heard her right. My aunt, my mother's older sister, the woman who cradled me as a baby and braided my hair as a child, had just erased me from the family tree with a single sentence. The dining room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker, as if the oxygen had been sucked out through her perfectly lipsticked mouth. It wasn't a fight. There wasn't any shouting. It was worse than that. It was calm, deliberate, with the chilly precision of someone who knows their place in the hierarchy and enjoys reminding you of yours. We were at a family gathering, one of those monthly dinners where everyone pretended we were close, and I dared to offer an opinion on the future of the family business, something I had been studying closely for months. My voice had been quiet, respectful even, as I suggested modernizing their outdated financial systems. She laughed lightly, that practiced tinkle that had always made my skin crawl, and then said it. "You're not really family. You wouldn't understand. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching, especially if you've ever felt invisible in your own family." No one corrected her. My mother looked down at her plate, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the china. My cousins, her golden children, changed the subject to something safer, something that wouldn't require my input. I sat there, heat rising in my face, like a fever, and something inside me began to harden, crystallizing into something I didn't yet recognize. They had always seen me as different. My father was from another country, with skin darker than theirs, and an accent that never quite disappeared. I didn't grow up with money. We lived paycheck to paycheck while they summered in the Hamptons. I didn't follow the family script of private schools and trust funds and marriages arranged through country club connections. I worked through college, cleaning offices at night and tutoring rich kids during the day, building things alone while they built networks through inheritance. I stayed quiet when they mocked my choices. When I chose state school over their alma mater. When I started my own business instead of joining the family firm. When I dated people they deemed unsuitable. I absorbed their subtle dismissals like a sponge absorbs water. Silently, completely, until I was saturated with their disapproval. But that moment carved something deeper. It wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure. She had taken a scalpel to my identity and cut me away from the only roots I'd ever known. For days after, I couldn't sleep. The silence that followed her words roared in my ears like ocean waves against a cliff. I replayed every moment from childhood with new eyes. Her favoritism that I'd dismissed as my imagination. Her subtle dismissals that I'd rationalized as misunderstandings. The way she always called my cousins by pet names. Sweetheart, darling, my angel, and me by my full name, pronounced with the careful distance of someone addressing a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I remembered birthday parties where my gifts were acknowledged with polite thank yous, while my cousins' gifts were celebrated with squeals of delight. Family photos where I somehow always ended up on the edge, half cut out of the frame. Holiday dinners where conversations flowed around me like water around a stone, as if I were an obstacle to be navigated rather than a person to be included. The memories came in waves, each one a small paper cut that together formed a deeper wound. I saw the pattern now, crystal clear and undeniable. I had spent 28 years making excuses for treatment that no stranger would have tolerated from another stranger. I stopped attending family events. Not dramatically, there was no big announcement, no door-slamming exit. I simply became unavailable. Birthday party? I had work. Christmas dinner? I was feeling under the weather. Easter brunch? I was traveling. Each declined invitation was met with perfunctory disappointment that felt more like relief than regret. I stopped answering her texts, the ones that came sporadically, usually when she needed something. A ride to the airport, a favor for one of her friends, someone to watch her house while she vacationed. The requests that had once made me feel needed now felt like confirmation of my relegated status as family convenience rather than family member. There was no dramatic exit, just absence. While they celebrated birthdays and shared photos on social media, I disappeared into my own world, where worth wasn't decided by bloodlines, but by what I could build with my own two hands. I focused on my startup, a financial tech platform I'd founded with two friends from college. Maya, whose parents had immigrated from India, and Alex, whose family had never had money either. We were the trio of outsiders, the ones who understood that success wasn't inherited, but earned through countless nights of coding and caffeine and crushing self-doubt. We bootstrapped everything. Maya sold her car. Alex moved back in with his parents. I liquidated my savings account and took on freelance projects that paid the bills while we built our dream. We failed spectacularly at first. Our initial product was clunky, our marketing non-existent, our investor pitches disasters, of nervous energy and overambitious projections. But we learned. We pivoted. We started over. I worked through the nights, my laptop screen glowing in darkened coffee shops and empty libraries, through heartbreak when my college boyfriend left because I was never available anymore, through every whisper of inadequacy echoing in my memory like a broken record. The more I felt small in their eyes, the more I wanted to prove that small did not mean powerless. Each rejection letter from investors became fuel. Each failed prototype became a lesson. Each sleepless night became evidence that I was willing to work harder than anyone who had been handed their opportunities on silver platters. There was a particular moment, 2 years after that family dinner, when everything shifted. I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of a Manhattan high-rise, leading a pitch to Sterling Ventures, one of the most respected VC firms in the city. The room was full of sharp suits and sharper questions, the kind of people who could smell desperation from across a boardroom table. But I wasn't desperate anymore. I was prepared. I knew our numbers inside and out, understood our market better than anyone in that room, believed in our product, with the quiet confidence that comes from having built something real from nothing but an idea and stubborn persistence. They asked smart questions, and I answered with calm precision. When they challenged our projections, I had data. When they questioned our competitive advantage, I had strategy. When they wondered about scalability, I had a roadmap that stretched 5 years into the future, detailed enough to show I'd thought through every possible scenario. By the end of the hour, I'd secured not just capital, but control. They wanted in, but on my terms. The kid who had been told she wasn't really family was now holding the keys to a multi-million-dollar deal. I never told anyone from the family. They never asked. Why would they? In their minds, I was still the girl who worked nights to pay for college, the one who couldn't possibly understand real business because I hadn't been born into it. Months passed. Our platform launched to critical acclaim. Tech blogs called it revolutionary. Business journals featured me on their covers. I spoke at conferences, advised other startups, built the kind of reputation that opens doors and creates opportunities. And through it all, radio silence from the family who had decided I wasn't family at all. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, my aunt reached out. The email appeared in my inbox like a ghost from a past I'd worked hard to leave behind. The subject line read, Partnership Opportunity, Sterling Financial Solutions. My blood went cold. She had no idea I was behind the company that was leading the funding round for a fintech initiative her firm desperately wanted to partner with. She had found my name listed as a point of contact on our corporate website, but clearly hadn't connected the dots. To her, I was still just her sister's daughter, the one who didn't really belong. The idea that I could be running a successful company, let alone one she needed, hadn't even crossed her mind. Her approach was purely professional, conducted through formal channels as if we were strangers, which I suppose we were. The email was polite but cold, the kind of corporate language designed to establish hierarchy from the first sentence. She wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss mutually beneficial opportunities and strategic partnerships that could benefit both organizations. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling that strange stillness that comes when the universe presents you with something you never knew you were waiting for. The woman who had erased me from the family tree was now asking for my professional help, completely unaware that she was asking her discarded niece for a favor. I could have ignored it. Should have, maybe. But there was something poetic about the moment that I couldn't resist exploring. So I responded with the same corporate politeness, agreeing to meet at my office the following week. The days leading up to the meeting felt suspended in time. I found myself remembering things I'd buried. Her condescending smile when I'd announced my college acceptance to state school instead of her alma mater. The way she'd introduced me to her friends as my sister's daughter instead of my niece. The Christmas when she'd given my cousins thoughtful, expensive gifts and handed me a generic gift card with my name misspelled on the envelope. But I also remembered the woman who had taught me to braid friendship bracelets, who had taken me to my first Broadway show, who had once told me I was smart enough to do anything I set my mind to. Before the family business became everything, before money complicated every relationship, before I became someone who didn't fit their carefully curated image. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Not to impress, I was past needing her approval, but to embody the person I'd become, the navy blazer that had been my first purchase after our Series A funding. The vintage watch that had belonged to my father. The one tangible connection to the heritage she'd dismissed. The confidence that came from knowing I belonged in rooms, like these not because of who I was born to, but because of what I'd built. She arrived 15 minutes early, probably hoping to establish some psychological advantage by claiming the space first. I watched from my office window as she stepped out of her luxury sedan, still beautiful at 55, still carrying herself with the kind of assured grace that comes from never having to question your place in the world. My assistant showed her to the conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I made her wait exactly 10 minutes, not out of cruelty, but because I needed those moments to center myself, to remember who I was now versus who I'd been. In her dining room 3 years ago, when I walked into that room, I saw the exact moment she recognized me. Not immediately. It took a few seconds for the reality to penetrate. Her polite business smile faltered, then froze, then slowly transformed into something between confusion and dawning horror. "Hello, Aunt Patricia," I said quietly, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Thank you for coming in." She managed to recover her composure with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent decades in boardrooms, but I caught the tremor in her hands as she opened her portfolio. "I didn't realize you were involved with Sterling Financial," she said, her voice carefully modulated. "I founded it," I replied simply, "along with my partners, Maya Chen and Alex Rodriguez. We've been operating for 3 years now." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I watched her process this information, saw her mental gears turning as she tried to reconcile the niece she'd dismissed with the CEO sitting across from her. Her firm needed this partnership. I'd done my research. They were hemorrhaging clients to more technologically advanced competitors, and our platform could save them. She knew it, and now she knew I knew it too. "Your company has quite an impressive portfolio," she said finally, falling back on the safety of business speak. "We've been fortunate," I said, though fortune had nothing to do with the 18-hour days and sleepless nights that had built our success. "Now, let's discuss how we might be able to help each other." The next hour was surreal. She pitched her company's capabilities with desperate professionalism, while I listened with the calm detachment of someone who held all the cards. Every few minutes, I caught her studying my face, as if trying to find traces of the insecure girl who'd once sought her approval. But that girl was gone. In her place sat a woman who'd learned that family wasn't about blood or acceptance. It was about building something meaningful with people who saw your worth without needing to be convinced of it. When she finished her presentation, I leaned back in my chair, and considered her proposal. It wasn't terrible. Their client base was substantial, their reputation solid despite their technological shortcomings. Under different circumstances, it might have been exactly the kind of partnership we were looking for. "I appreciate you coming in," I said finally. "My team will review your proposal and get back to you within the week." She nodded, gathering her materials with hands that shook slightly. As she reached the door, she turned back. "I suppose I should congratulate you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is quite an accomplishment." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had shaped so much of my self-doubt, who'd taught me that love was conditional and belonging was earned through compliance rather than simply existing. "I suppose," I said quietly, "that I'm not really family, so you wouldn't understand." Her face went white. The words hung in the air between us, my own thrown back at her with surgical precision. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it. What was there to say? We both knew what those words had cost, what they had built, what they had ultimately destroyed. She left without another word. That night, I called Maya and Alex, and we celebrated with takeout Chinese food and cheap wine in my apartment. Not because we were getting the deal, we hadn't decided yet, but because I'd faced the ghost of my past and emerged unscathed. The girl who'd been told she wasn't family had become a woman who no longer needed their definition of belonging. A week later, I sent her our terms. They were fair but firm, professional but uncompromising. We would consider the partnership, but it would be on our timeline, our conditions, our control. Take it or leave it. She took it. The contract signing happened in the same conference room where she'd first realized who I'd become. She arrived alone this time. No assistants or lawyers to buffer the awkwardness. Just her and me and a stack of papers that redefined our relationship, from family disappointment to business equals. As she signed each page, I watched her carefully. There was no anger in her movements, no resentment. Just a quiet, dawning understanding of everything that had led us to this moment. The power of consequences that arrive not with drama, but with the steady inevitability of time and effort and refused acceptance of limitation. "You know," she said softly as she signed the final page, "when you were little, you used to follow me around everywhere. You'd copy everything I did, wear your hair the way I wore mine, practice walking in my high heels." I remembered. I'd wanted to be just like her. Sophisticated, successful, seemingly unshakable in her confidence. "You told me once that you wanted to grow up to be exactly like me," she continued, not meeting my eyes. "I suppose you did, in your own way." "No," I said quietly. "I grew up to be exactly like me. That's what you never understood." She looked up then, and for just a moment, I saw something that might have been regret, or perhaps just recognition of the girl she'd dismissed, the woman I'd become, the family she'd lost through her own narrow definitions of worth. We shook hands when the signing was complete. Her grip was firm but brief, her smile polite but distant. We were business partners now. Nothing more, nothing less. The family drama had transformed into a professional relationship built on mutual benefit rather than blood or affection. 6 months later, our partnership generated millions in revenue for both companies. The tech blogs wrote articles about innovative cross-industry collaboration. Business schools used our model as a case study in successful strategic partnerships. She never apologized. I never expected her to. Some hurts are too deep for words, some relationships too broken for simple repairs. But she learned to speak to me with respect, to acknowledge my expertise, to treat me as the equal I'd always been but she'd never recognized. At family gatherings, the few I now attended, she introduced me differently. "This is my niece," she'd say, with something that almost resembled pride. "She runs a very successful tech company. Not quite the warmth I'd craved as a child, but recognition nonetheless. My mother asked me once if I was happy with how things turned out. I thought about it for a long time before answering. Happy felt too simple for something so complex. Satisfied, maybe. Complete in a way I'd never been before. I'd learned that belonging isn't something granted by others. It's something you create for yourself. That family isn't always the people who share your blood, but the ones who see your worth without needing to be convinced. That sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating someone who hurt you, but becoming so successful that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. The girl who was told she wasn't really family had built her own family, Maya and Alex, the employees, who believed in our vision, the mentors who invested in our dreams, the community of outsiders who'd become insiders through sheer determination and mutual support. And in the end, I realized I'd never needed her approval to know who I was. I'd only needed the silence to echo long enough for the truth to land. That worth isn't inherited, respect isn't given, and sometimes the most profound revenge is becoming impossible to ignore. They erased me from their story, but they couldn't delete me from my own.